afternoon or evening or 5 a.m. I hope it's not 5 a.m. when you're hearing this, but it's better than not hearing it at all now, ain't it? Welcome to week 7 of Civics at Home, and we're continuing on the most important stuff from Civics theme. Last week it was the Constitution, how the government works. This week it is about your rights. Again, these are the two most important things you really should take away from civics class. This is the reason why you're in civics class, really. These two main things. The other stuff is important too, but this is the stuff you should really take with you. And probably especially this one, your rights. Now, in real life, somebody's not going to ask you, "Oh, what is in the Fourth Amendment?" or "Which amendment has something about, yeah, you have a right to an attorney." You don't have to know what's in the Fourth, no illegal search and seizure, or in this, or the Sixth Amendment says you have a right to an attorney, but you need to know you have those rights and all the other ones, because that's extremely important as a citizen, as we'll talk about as we go through the Bill of Rights. There's another video we'll talk about the other rights. We're starting right now with the first 10, aka the Bill of Rights. Okay, so the Bill of Rights, there are the first 10 amendments, and yes, they used to use F's where we use S's now. I don't quite understand the rules myself, to be honest, but that's why it says Congress of the United States. It's not a typo. That's how spelling was. English is a weird language. Anyway, before we get jumping into language or the Bill of Rights, let's get a little perspective. As I've said in class many a time, people have been around for a very long time. We don't know how many years, a few 100,000. For 90-some% of that time, people did not have rights. They didn't think they have rights. It wasn't something that anybody really believed, really. Just you had leaders and they told you what to do. The end. The idea of individual rights popped up here and there, like little flickers of flame in different places. Persia, Egypt, China, ancient Greece is the most famous one, and Rome kind of borrowed the idea from Greece, but it all faded out some way or another. One problem was that rights were given to you by a leader. It was not like it's your rights. They were given to you by a leader, and they could, of course, then take them back if they felt like it, which, is better than nothing, but it's not the greatest thing. The Magna Carta, that's the slow step to changing things. Way back in 1215, almost actually over 800 years ago, is when some people, the nobles, got some rights, but it was a step in the right direction. It didn't say the king gives you this rights, like we forced you, king, to sign this because we have these rights. That's a step in the right direction. The Enlightenment, remember, was a time when people questioned everything, and in science and theology, everything. People questioned how the world works and what's a better way to do things, including in politics. During that time, a few different people had the idea that, maybe people do have rights, that a king doesn't give you those rights, you already have them. And in the 1680s in England, the Parliament forced the two new incoming King and Queen of England, William and Mary, to sign the English Bill of Rights. They gave more rights to more people, and also said the king and queen were not as important as the parliament. But the most important thing for us is, hey, these are rights for everybody now. So this is spreading this idea. John Locke, of course, he didn't come up with all these ideas like off the top of his head. He had read other people before him, but he really put it together nicely and tried to prove that we have these natural rights. There they are: life, liberty, and property. Those are his big three rights. And from there, you can get other rights. And he says these are not something that are given to you. These are something you're born with. Everybody has. Of course, that idea really influenced the Declaration of Independence, saying all men are created equal. We have these unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is so much more poetic. And it also obviously influenced other things too, besides the Declaration, but the Bill of Rights. You're just not just saying your three basic natural rights, you're saying all the other rights that come from those. So you got to really think back. This is not something that was common in the history of humankind. It was a relatively new idea when it was written into the Bill of Rights. In England, people had some rights. A couple of the places, some rights here and there. The U.S., we really, the government really had limits. You have rights. Now this idea is spread all over the place. Well over half of the countries in the world have rights. It's not over half of humanity, though, to be honest, because China has a very large population and they don't really have all these kind of rights. But over half of the countries do have rights, some, more or less what we have as well. The England and then the United States expanded on that a little more, really brought that out. All right, so it's good to have that background. Okay, let's go a little faster now. The Bill of Rights, here's some quick facts. They were first written by James Madison, the father of the Constitution, who was a Federalist and didn't really think this was a great idea to have Bill of Rights, but then he came around to it. And when he was elected to the House of Representatives, in the very first House of Representatives, and he was elected Speaker of the House, and he wrote the first draft. And after they were finished, he wanted to stick them right there in the Constitution, and they're like, no, James, let's put it at the end. And that's what we've done ever since. So, if you recall, to change the Constitution, 2/3 of both houses of Congress have to vote for something, and they did on September 25th, 1789. And then it bounces out to the states, and 3/5 of the states have to ratify them. Originally, there were 12 amendments, and 10 were approved over the next couple years. And they weren't called the Bill of Rights at the time. Later, that was a nice way to sum them all up together, the Bill of Rights. And obviously the first draft is never what is finally published. That's an actual picture of the first draft, all scribbled all over. So yeah, there was a lot of arguments about it. It's Congress, so they're going to argue and have to compromise, and they did. Here's what they came up with. All right, so the First Amendment is probably the most important and has those big 5 rights there. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition. Exactly what those means, people have been arguing about that ever since. Because remember, the Bill of Rights is not really detailed, just like the rest of the Constitution. So it leaves some things up to interpretation. So free religion said, the government cannot set up a religion, and it cannot force you to follow any religion. And it also can't stop religions from doing what they want to do, unless, they do something horrible as part of their religion. But besides that, people are free to have whatever religion or not that they want. Freedom of speech, you can express yourself and your opinions unless you're causing a clear and present danger to somebody else. Or remember, there's a case that talks about freedom of speech in schools. We'll get to that in a minute. Freedom of the press, that's extremely important. All the original founding fathers and a lot of wise people afterwards said and believed, and are probably right, that freedom of the press is extremely important. If you don't know what your government is doing and what everybody else is doing, how can you make good voting citizen decisions if you don't know what's actually going on? So freedom of the press, coming out to you with with the facts, is extremely important. That's why it's in the First Amendment. Freedom of assembly, people can gather peacefully. It's interesting that right now there are some protests, people saying this lockdown for the coronavirus is too long and too much. Well, there have been cases in the past where freedom of assembly can be curtailed, can be cut back in situations like this. This is an emergency. So it's not like it's completely unconstitutional, this whole stay-at-home thing. No, the cases in the past and other situations like the 1918 flu pandemic, it is legal, not forever, but for as long as it's unsafe to gather in large groups. So we'll see how that goes. It has not gone to court yet right now. Maybe it will. We'll see. By the time the court cases go through, though, the coronavirus, we might have a vaccine. It takes a while to work through the courts. And the last one, freedom of petition. You can communicate freely with your government, let them know what you want. Because it is a democracy, they should work for you. So letting them know what you want is kind of important. All right, so quickly, some First Amendment cases. There have been so many First Amendment cases, more than all the other amendments. Probably not all the other amendments put together, but by far the most, because there's so many rights in there, and people argue about exactly what they mean. We're just going to talk about one right now that we talked about in class. And that case, of course, is Tinker versus Des Moines. The kids that were wearing those armbands protesting the Vietnam War, and they were suspended because the principal didn't like the armbands. I think it was a good idea. The Supreme Court ruled years later, after they were already in college or actually out of college. I think one of them. It takes a while to get to the courts. They said that, speech is more than just words, so that is covered by free speech, and you are not disrupting the school, they said. So the school cannot stop you from doing that. In that case, remember we talked about it, the other case, the Hazelwood case, where the court said, that is disrupting the school, so you can't do that. So that is the rule in school. If you're not disrupting the educational mission of the school, then it should be okay. If you are, then it's not, which is why you can't just get up in class and start singing Baby Shark. That's disrupting not only education, but everybody's, ears and mental health. So don't go doing that, because once it gets stuck in your head, it's hard to get out. So that would be unconstitutional. Thank goodness. Okay, next one, the Second Amendment. Obviously, it comes after the first. And that's the one about the right to bear arms. There's been arguments about exactly how much it protects gun safety and gun regulations. And again, this has been in the news a lot too. It has been really for pretty much since the country started. What exactly it means. The case we talked about that covers this was the Columbia versus Heller one. This is the most recent case we talked about in class, actually, saying that by a 5-4 decision that a law in Washington, D.C. that says you had to register any handguns and most people weren't really allowed to have them, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. The Second Amendment does cover owning a weapon to protect yourself and your home. So that's again, it's an ongoing thing. This is one of many cases, and actually, there are some cases that are working their way up to the courts right now about gun control as well. So this is something that always comes up in court. The next one is the Third Amendment. I can count. This one has never come to the court, and it just says, remember back before the Revolutionary War, the British government said that American colonists had to let British soldiers stay in their homes and pay for their room and board if they were asked to. And so the colonists obviously didn't like that very much, and so they said, we're not going to do that when we have our own government, and so that's what they did. It has never come up before the Supreme Court because the government has not forced, people to take soldiers into their houses. The next one is the fourth. This is all about searches and seizures that they're not allowed to, in order for the law enforcement officer goes searching underneath your dresser drawer, they have to have either a warrant or a really good reason, usually a warrant, and they have to go to a judge to get it. It doesn't have to be like a court hearing, whatever. They can call a judge. There are judges on call, in case police need to search something. They give them the basic facts, and they can be approved quickly if they need to. There's some paperwork involved, and they can't really lie, because then if they lie about why they needed a warrant, then later on, if any evidence is used that was gotten, by lying about a warrant, then that evidence will be thrown out, and the prosecutors won't be able to use that in a court case. But anyway, that's what the Fourth Amendment mainly does: protects from unreasonable search and seizure. Next one, fifth, does many things actually. This all talks about mainly the rights of the accused mostly. Including you have to have a grand jury, meaning you have to, if you're going to be charged with something and put on trial, there has to be a good reason for it. If somebody is found not guilty, then they cannot be tried again on the exact same crime. No double jeopardy, and so that is why prosecutors need to make sure if they're going to get somebody on that are found guilty, you better get them the first time, because there aren't no second chances. Also, it says you don't have to testify against yourself in court. You can say plead the Fifth Amendment and don't have to testify. That's to prevent, people from being tortured and such for testifying against themselves. And this seems like a completely different thing, because it kind of is. But if the government wants to take property for something like building a highway and whatnot, they have to pay a fair price, and usually in real life it's more than a fair price for that property before they can take it. And government does not usually do that, only if they need to. But it's in the Constitution, they have to pay a fair price. They can't just take it. All right, the Sixth Amendment. This is all about the rights of somebody in a criminal trial. And so you're guaranteed a fair and speedy trial. You got to know what you're accused of, obviously, or that's not fair. You get a jury of one's peers. Remember, that idea of a trial by jury goes way back to the Magna Carta, where normal people will sit there and listen to the case and decide whether you're guilty or not. That continues till now. It's more fair than having just a judge who, hopefully they're honest, but one person. It's best to have just a jury decide in most cases. And then you can call and question witnesses, of course. You can be represented by a lawyer. Obviously, that's important to know the legal system if you are in jail like that. We did talk about a couple of cases that deal with these things. Some of these cases kind of go with more than one amendment, like this one. Miranda, if you recall, he was charged with assault. He was put on, before he was put on trial, he was questioned, and he said, yeah, I did it, basically. He didn't have a lawyer. He wasn't told he could have a lawyer. He was kind of coerced into saying that. So the Supreme Court eventually ruled 5-4 that no, that violated his rights. The Fifth Amendment says he didn't have to testify against himself. The Sixth Amendment said he should have had a lawyer. So they gave him a new trial. He was found guilty again because he did it, but at least it was a fair trial. So now, every time somebody's arrested, the Miranda rights are read to them. You have a right to remain silent, etc., etc. Yeah, and all right. So the next case, Gideon versus Wainwright. That's the one we saw some movie clips for, with Henry Fonda playing Clarence Gideon and doing a pretty good job, if I say so myself, even though it's not me and he's not related. But Henry Fonda was a good actor. Stay on task. So if you don't have a lawyer, the idea is you can't have a fair trial if you don't have a lawyer, even in a simple case like he was, just arrested for breaking into this little pool hall, but he didn't have a lawyer and he was found guilty. So in his case, went to the Supreme Court. They said, yeah, that's not right. People should have a lawyer in criminal cases, or else you're not going to get a fair trial. And he was retried with a lawyer, and if you recall, he was found innocent because he did not do it. So there was fairness in action, and then he walked away at the end of the movie. And in real life, also. So that's a Sixth Amendment case. Lawyers are provided for people if they cannot afford one. There's public defenders' offices that do that all across the country. And the last case we talked about was the Gault case, the poor kid that was arrested and sentenced to 6 years in juvenile home for allegedly making a rude phone call to a neighbor. And he did not have a fair trial, if you recall. Was just sitting there with a judge, no witnesses, no lawyers, no anything. And the reason why he was treated like that was because he was a kid, 13-year-old at the time this whole thing happened. And his rights weren't really protected. So the Supreme Court said that's terrible. His Fifth Amendment was broken because he was made to confess. But even though he said he didn't confess, and there was no tape recording or anything, so nobody knows whether he did or not. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a jury. He couldn't talk to witnesses. All that's in the Sixth Amendment. So overall, he was treated extremely unfairly. And so the court ruled that by that point the court ruled that he could have a new trial, but the state said forget it, and so he was just set free. And that set up so that now minors still get their you have rights. There's a whole juvenile justice system that really helps kids if they're in trouble to have a fair hearing, to have a fair trial if they need it. Okay, moving on. The Seventh Amendment just talks about civil cases. Some students are always confused that the Seventh Amendment says that you have a right to a jury. That is true, but that only talks about civil trials. The Sixth Amendment talks about a jury in a criminal trial. So civil trials, if you recall, is when somebody's arguing about a contract. Somebody said, "Oh, you hurt. I slipped and fell and got a boo-boo, and I'm suing you." That kind of stuff. Or you pay somebody to do something and they don't. These are all civil trials. So in those cases, you can have a trial by jury. Sometimes, like I've said, both sides will say that's too expensive. It takes too long, so forget it. We'll let the judge decide. But you have a right to it. Criminal trials, when somebody's accused of a crime and they can be thrown in jail, guilty or innocent, all that good stuff. All right. Speaking of being guilty or innocent, the Eighth Amendment with the poor guy in the stockade, that's not allowed because the Eighth Amendment says that punishment should be fair, should fit the crime. No cruel and unusual punishment, no huge fines, no huge bails have to be set. So, punishment should be reasonable. Up there is Old Sparky, the old electric chair for the state of Florida, which has not been used in a long time because there's been lawsuits saying it was cruel and unusual punishment. So that is not allowed by the Eighth Amendment. All right, now the Ninth and 10th Amendment. If you recall, these were catch-all amendments. Way back when the Constitution was being ratified, as you remember from class, I hope, this is second quarter, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists were the two sides saying that no, we should not ratify this new Constitution, or yes, we could, or yes, we should. The Anti-Federalists, one of their arguments was there's no list of rights. So how do we know this government is going to trample over our rights? And we need a list to say exactly what our rights are. The Federalists said, yeah, of course rights are important. But if we start listing rights, we're going to miss some. And then some future government might say, well, no, it's not listed. You don't have that right. So, for instance, is there a right to sit outside in your backyard and record civics videos? No, there's not. Oh, my goodness. Are the paratroopers going to drop in my backyard and arrest me? I hope not. But if so, no, I'm protected by the Ninth Amendment because, sure, it's a reasonable right. There's nothing wrong with sitting back here. I'm trying to educate the youth of America, or at least the ones in my classes. So it's okay. So this Ninth Amendment covers everything that's not specifically listed. So of course you're going to have people argue about what is not a right, sure, but it's better than having a future government say, no, it's not listed, so you can't do it. 10th Amendment is another catch-all saying that, yeah, we didn't list everything government can do, but if it's not listed for the United States government, then the states can do it. Things like driver's licenses, marriage, education, all that kind of stuff is not in the Constitution. So it's saying the states should be more in charge of that, states and local governments. All right, so there's your quick run through the Bill of Rights. There will be another video talking about, well, other things, other amendments, other rights that you have. It'll be shorter though, so don't worry. Hope you hung in there. Thanks for listening.